Okay, so I was sharing that Wednesday during our working session, all committees were charged with prioritizing, which makes sense because we have limited capacity as a board. So that is pretty much our goal of this meeting, is to prioritize our work. I will say, I guess again, that I feel like our committee is a little bit different just because it is specific and kind of time bound. Um, by by his authorization, I guess. And so I'd be curious to know how like other people are thinking about going into that conversation. You all are on mute, Ruth and Jock.
Ebony, 1 second. David, this is Jacques.
Hold on, go ahead. Hi.
Great to meet you.
Yeah, I'm full vaccinated.
I am also.
But sorry, we hadn't met before coming to your home and everything like that. I was up here once before, but
He was here for the big Natalie Wexler.
I think great to meet you.
well, great to meet you. I get to work with your wife. So we got some projects we'll be working. So yeah, very nice to meet you.
Belated congratulations on
Thank you so
the
much.
election.
Thank you so much,
We're
sir.
in 3 committees.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
That's my
I know the committees are in good hands.
Thank you, sir. But go ahead. You were saying how you felt, and then I'll chime in.
Just, yeah, I mean, we need to have something to go in September because there's going to be, we think, I mean, who knows, but it is my understanding, and I think it's a good understanding that there will be something related to OSSI authority in a hearing as early as September. Maybe it won't be September, but I think it will be. So we need to have something.
And then my question, Ebony, would be, is that where we're really going to be focusing, on their authority over us? Is that the first really kind of like the thing that we're talking about, not so much as mayoral control, but what, how we sit in this whole thing based on whether it's the legislation from that they mentioned the other night, Shay's legislation or something like that. And are we doing it from a standpoint of we're responding to it? Are we getting out in front of it? Just kind of saying where we are. How do you see that? Would be my questions.
So I see us needing to kind of get out in front
Okay.
of a lot of it. Like I think that we should, I think our priority is starting to do the homework part of it. So thinking about, I mean, not even thinking about, but like really starting to act on like if it's lining up the people we want to talk to as a committee, as far as experts, right, and getting this lit review done. Like I feel like a lot of like we should be, if we're going to get out in front of it, we need to start to do that, and hopefully just having some. The other thing I think would be helpful to add to the conversation is us starting to do some engagement to just figure out like where people are on this, because I don't take for granted that at this moment in time in particular, since there's no education committee, that anyone is doing the homework. Like it's, I mean, I feel like we focus a lot on like, is there a council member responsible, but we forget about the committee staff who really are the people who, dig into the issue. Yeah. So I want to make sure that we can not just be responsive to what's on the table, but be a value add and kind of lifting up what we're learning, as well as including what people, where people are on this in particular. Because I don't think anybody's actually, I don't think enough legwork has been done around that.
And I think, you have different parts of the city who sees this very differently. There, we know from living east of the river, it's not such a vocal aspect. We say some things, but we're not as vocal sometimes in saying that mayoral control needs to go. There's pockets of us, but as for a large constituency, it's not as high on some of their radars as getting back to school and vaccines and all that kind of stuff like that. So it's going to be interesting to make sure that we get a wide breadth of things and educate some people on what has even happened. Some people still don't know, what we do and what we don't do. And where they would like us to see us operate.
And I would say in Ward 3, you know, so many people have come since there was mayoral control of the schools, or at least their kids have entered school since there was mayoral control, so they don't know something different. I think at the moment, it is a high point of people's being really unhappy with the school system, period. And therefore, and we just keep saying, it's the mayor, it's the mayor, it's the mayor. So there's beginning to be an understanding that they don't have levers to bring about the kinds of decisions they want, except for through the mayor. And I would say people aren't that happy about it, insofar as they're very involved in schools and insofar as that's their main issue. Beyond that, I have no idea what people think. Zero.
I mean,
You know, or how much they care.
just so you guys know, Auditor Patterson left before I could ask the question, because I was going to ask the question because she was chair, you know, and I had my hand up when she had to leave right at, you know, 6 o'clock and stuff like that. I wanted for her to hear, you know, after talking about the audit, I wanted to hear, like, you were there right when this was happening. Like, she left the year that they voted for it. She left in 2007. Because I looked it up and everything like that. What was her thoughts? You know, so I was going to deviate away, try to take a point of allowance or privilege and ask her, you know, what are your thoughts? You chaired the committee. So we kind of get it on record just here if she would have answered that question. I don't know if she even would have answered the question, you know, because it's off topic. But just to see what she is. So those are the kind of people that I want to kind of know, but just people who have done the work and of course, you know, the larger community. But I do want to know from, like, I saw something this morning where Kevin Chavis was talking, who was, you know, your former council member, education committee chair for a while, still very heavily involved in education as a whole, as a constituent. Those are some of the people I also want to hear from, and I consider them almost experts for the mere fact of their longevity in this work, having to craft it. It's kind of like if you're going to ask about what should the mayor do, you would ask, if he was alive, Marion Barry, you know, because he's done the work, he's been heavily invested in it, stuff like that. So those are some of the people that I would love as we're doing community engagement, is some of the people who have done some of this work. I wouldn't even mind talking to, like, Catania to see what his thought process is. You know, whether we disagree or agree with some of his policy, he was chair and have a lot of insight, put a lot of stuff into this, a lot of work into this. So that's just, you know, some of the people that come to my mind as quote unquote experts, because they've seen us go through all the iterations that we've had, and had a lot of votes and stuff like that on what we did. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and I would say it would probably be helpful for us to think about, like, start to get some of those conversations scheduled, and for us to think about the vehicle for those conversations. Like, is it that we're scheduling them kind of as committee meetings and they come present to this committee? Are we hoping that's part of the external, somebody goes out and does, like, the interviews and, like, brings up, like, I actually, that feels a little sterile to me, but like, I feel like we did the larger work of, like, this is the skeleton of the work we want to do, and we need to flesh out a little bit more how we want to do it, like, how, like, so is it, and start to, like, move, because if not, then we won't be ready to Ruth's point for that identified fall timeline.
And one suggestion to talk about. One is, I would love to see some of these people come and talk to us as a committee like that. Second, I've started keeping a list like this, and I wonder if others have similar thoughts, which is the ways in which supposedly mayoral control should have helped, but didn't, right? So just as an example, this is a very Ward 3-like thing. My guess is it exists in other places, but on the school facility issue, you would think that with the mayor in control, that you wouldn't have to go through so much difficulty trying to understand, is there a DPR facility available? right? That's supposed to be part of what came with mayoral control, or, if there's a bankrupt building and you have 4,000 extra students that aren't housed in a school, aren't school building it, whatever, can you purchase it, right? You'd think that because the mayor's in control, these should be things that could happen more smoothly, and they're probably more difficult than if you had a school board. That's one example. And there was, I'll think about it, but I've started to make kind of a list of things like that.
And Ebony, if I may say, I kind of like all of your ideas. And I'm sorry, I'm that kind of person that kind of looks at things for what they are and try to say, okay, so who's also the audience and who's going to be receiving this? And then how are they going to perceive it? So like, I like surveys for certain groups of people to make sure that we get a wide breadth of people, because that's the easiest way. And we engage people and we get responses back. And those who really get it, they'll give us their responses and we allow for them to add some commentary. I also like actual panels of like, say, if we did a panel of former council education chairs and we had them come on and as a group and ask them their question. I don't think that's something that's ever been done. Not only do we gain the information, but it also shows how serious we are as the State Board of Education and in this particular area, not being self-serving, but actually listening to people who have done the work, the homework. So say we had a panel one time where we did have Chavis, Catania, Patterson, and if Grosso did it, those 4 people that came on and kind of talked about their experiences chairing it and what that meant and their interactions with the State Board of Education, the good, the bad, the ugly, to kind of inform us. And that's tape 2 or whatever the case. I want to make sure whatever we suggest, it doesn't seem self-serving, I guess is what I'm getting to, because it's very easy to say we're trying to do a power grab for the State Board of Education, that this is the time where we want to take mayoral control from the mayor because we just want to do it because everybody's up in arms a little bit about it. And we want to take some kind of power from the mayor. And I don't want that to be the case. I want it to be like, this is the best way for the State Board of Education to interact and be accountable to the people who vote for them and to hold other people accountable, to have some authority to hold people accountable. I don't want it just to be perceived in any negative type of way. We're doing this because we want more power. That's all it is we want more power.
It sounds like two action items. One would be kind of listing, like, I guess like listing out what are the things like we were trying to solve for, and or I would add to that is maybe pain points that we are currently experiencing. So we can start to formulate like what some questions would be. And the other, I think, is just making a list of like this expert list. So we can start to reach out and get some of these things scheduled. So it sounds like we want, one thing we definitely want to do is have people present to this committee to inform our thinking. Like I would add people I would also be curious about. I want to know what Trayon has to say, given that he went from the board to the council. Mm-hmm. Like what his experience was. I would want to know what my current council member thinks, given both his tenure on the council, but the fact that he actually was in charge. Mm-hmm. And he was actually in charge of schools.
He literally was in charge. It was in the committee as a whole the first time with him. That's correct.
Yeah, and he was the mayor.
Right, at the same,
right, like he was actually, like when we talk about mayoral control, you have Fenty, Gray, and Bowser. My guess is Bowser is off the table for some obvious reasons.
The political aspect of it, so yes.
Correct. So that's not an option.
But there is Gray, and there is,
there's Gray and Fenty, and so it would make sense for us to have that set of experiences included. Yeah, and so let's make a list.
Okay.
And I feel like maybe we can figure out some of it via email, as far as like.
And we can.
This, right? Yeah, who's on the list, how we, yeah. I see you, Ruth. I can't hear you though.
So just to sort of push out some other names as part of brainstorming so that when we all go on our email, we're thinking of this. I mean, I would also like to hear from advocate types who worked under both of them. I mean, Mary Levy was critical of the old style, thought she would like the new style, hates the new style. Let's hear it. Pros and cons, what worked and what didn't. Mark Jones is someone who has sort of was there all the way through. And I know his views have changed.
And I like Pierre for Ward 5. I like him a lot because he went through like at least 3 iterations when we
Yes.
were 2 wards, when we were
Yes.
1 ward, Ward 5. He went through a couple iterations.
As a
of it.
board member, and also at one point, I think he worked for Williams, I think. So he also had that angle on it. Maybe this would be hard. I was gonna say a principal who has been here the whole time, but then I was thinking they couldn't be very candid, but I wonder about a principal who had been here through all the regimes who has voluntarily left. I don't know who that would be. I was originally thinking Maria Chukeva,
Yeah.
but
And that's hard for the
But-
simple fact because their boss is Fairby,
Right.
who then to the mayor, that political aspect of the pressure that they can put on a person if they can speak freely about
that's
that.
why maybe
Yeah.
a former
Yeah.
person. So people think about who were like principals that
Mm-hmm.
were here for a long time through all of it, but don't work here now. Might be something.
And just so you know, and he's out there and he's still informing a lot of things. Rob Bob is still out there. He came in right when
Yeah.
and so that you guys know a little inside information. I was at the Federal City Council at that time, and they were so pissed at him because he started out saying, I support it. And right when Fenty was elected and they were ready to change it and stuff like that, coming out of Williams, he's like, I hate it. And they kind of shut it down. Well, so why do you hate mayoral control? And they kind of shut it down, all the kind of powers that be at that particular time. But he was right in the mix because he got elected the same time that Fenty did that year. I actually was in Ward 7 at their victory party, kind of sort of. And it was interesting because he's like, this is not going to work. This is not good. This mayoral control that we're about to vote on is not good. So I thought that was just interesting, but I remember them shutting it down and pushing forward with the vote. And he did his 1 term as a president. So remember, he came in as president. We had control. He left. We did not have control. Like he was the linchpin in between the two.
Okay. I'm taking notes and have all these people on the list.
Yeah, and I'm just here to help. So wherever you tell me to go to work, that's what I do.
No, this is helpful. Are there other thoughts about like what is like the getting started, right? Because that's where we are.
Sort of
So
a way it's a research agenda, but research being both literature reviews and who we want to talk to and what are our questions, right?
Yeah, because I mean, in my head, is I'll tell you what's rolling around in my head. So what's rolling around in my head is we still have to have the conversations around what we spend money on as a board. We have said that ideally we would have some type of, we would not use staff time. We would have somebody else do the lit review, and then we would have somebody else start to do like their public engagement because we want like a neutral facilitator. So if we don't have those people on board, we can't. I mean, like we can start to do some of our homework. We can line some stuff up, but we can't fully jump right into those things. Right? And then it also sounds like, which makes sense because it's DC government, procurement rules apply, which is depending on how much it costs, you have to do the bidding and all that type of stuff. I don't see, my guess is for the lit review, maybe it would not be, it wouldn't rise to that level. I'm curious, depending on what we come up with as far as some type of engagement plan. Like I think we need some type of core scope of work. So we think of if that actually might be more.
And that could rise to the level, I think, Ebony Rose, it's 25 grand is when it becomes like bidding bidding, everything underneath that is not?
I think.
I
for
think I
us,
don't know, is it
well,
lower?
Yes, and if John Paul's on, I think for us, I don't know why this would be. I think is it 5 or 10?
That's low.
Yeah, that's.
It
very
is
low.
very low, and I just want to say everything that we tried to do that required bidding, it's very endless and it's difficult, and you don't then have much. Well, I don't know, John Paul, are you there?
John Paul's not here, but Ruth, you are correct that there are some ways that the state board can purchase or procure a service when it's below a certain value.
But what is our?
What
what's
is
the-
that value? What is that before it has to go out for bid and there's proposals and that whole process and it's reviewed? What is that number?
So again, it's my understanding, and don't quote me on this, but I believe some goods may be purchased directly by the state board without a procurement process if it is under $5,000.
It's very low. Another option on this to consider is whether we might get a university. I mean, I guess there's a timeline issue on this, although the consultants have timelines too, is whether there's, working with the universities, there's a professor that could, assign, somebody who would write a paper on this, give me, if we had some nice narrow questions, like what are the responsibilities other state boards have? What are the responsibilities other mayoral control mayors have?
And there is one that, that's a very interesting one, being in class right now. I know my chair is very interested. He helped design my current chair, Ron Brown School in your ward, Ebony Rose.
Who's the current chair?
His Robert Simmons,
Yeah.
Now you laugh.
That's what, wait, Robert Simmons is what?
He's my chair of my dissertation.
Oh, is he?
Yeah,
He just moved. Didn't he just? Well, yeah. I feel like Robert's always got a new job.
Yeah, he got a new job and is at American, and he is one of the professors in the EDD program.
That's why I laughed, because he was just at he was at Maya Angelou's Forever.
Right.
He was at
He mentions that.
New Teacher Center or something. One of our grantees he was working with. And,
So he is there with us, since this is I'm in the first cohort, so he is one of the professors one of the tenured professors that's there. I picked him as my chair, so I talk to him every week at this particular point. And I know he looks at stuff like this, as Ruth brought this up, like, okay, this could be a class assignment or something to that extent where I can use some of them. And he teaches policy implementation. That's a class I'm actually in, and quite a few papers to right now that I'm behind in.
So you could write one of these.
So it could be something like that. We could use somebody like that who has a deep knowledge and get some free stuff, so to speak. He has you know him, and he's been around DC for a while and worked with different people in DC government, where we could talk about governance. It could be a subject matter for American University or policy implementation, part of an assignment, and they could do a lot of our work, do a lot of researching, do a lot of writing, historical stuff, whatever. Look at best practices, do comparisons, you know what I'm saying? All that. What happened politically during the process of being implemented? Where did it get watered down? What actually came of it? Did it serve its purpose? Kind of really evaluate it. That's what we're doing right now, is evaluating policy.
And as I mentioned last time, I had a course at GW. I think we cover almost all the universities among our board members. I have a professor who did a governance course or an authority course, I forget what it was called. But he knows a lot about this and knows other people who know a lot about this. And, I could check in with him too. That's an option. And they could also come talk. Can I raise one? Can I take a little bit of a
Detour?
detour? Because I want to make this point. And if I made it before, I'm sorry.
no
but
worries.
At various times when I have tried to think this through for different reasons, what is so, I think, confusing for everybody and interesting. We are such we're so unique, you know, we're the unicorn, right? We can't, if we didn't have mayoral control, what would we be, right? We have one large district and 50 some small districts, some of which are just 1 or 2 or 3 schools. So you have a state board with a lot more authority like they do in a lot of other states, and also a local board. So here in this district of, you know, less than 1 million people, you have a council that hopefully soon will be a legislature, and a local school board and a state board. It's a lot, right? And if you know, in some places you might give some responsibility to the city council. Here, at least until there's some sort of legislature, you have the most overworked city council there is. You have 13 people, and they're responsible for everything for a city and for a state with these committees. How do you also add in education, which normally is partly handled by a governor and partly handled by a legislative committee and part.
We lost you and now you're on mute. We lost you at partly handled by, and then you're coming into your list.
So, I mean, you heard the basic point is that we're very different. And to sort of start to think about, this is how, one way to think about it is, what do state boards normally do? What do local boards normally do? What do mayors do where you have mayoral control? And what do charter boards do? And how do you amalgamate? I mean, somehow all those different responsibilities need to get handled. And I guess the main point is, whatever our state, and if this is what you heard, tell me, but if you didn't, a state board, we can't be a normal state board with only the same responsibilities or the same responsibilities as other state boards. Even if there wasn't mayoral control, because we're in one city, and how do we interact with one other huge school district, LEA, and 50 or so smaller ones? I mean, should there be a local school board for DCPS and a state board? That's a lot of people. Maybe we should have it. Or do you have a local DCPS school board, and then you have a state board that has responsibilities over DCPS and all the LEAs, and that becomes sort of almost instead of or part of or similar to the charter board? I mean, there's just a lot of ways to think about it. And to me, that's always, that's what's sort of complicated and creative and interesting about it. And I think we want to be able to put on the table sort of the facts around how other people do it, so we can start jigsawing. Because I think ultimately that's what we have to do.
That's going to be an interesting conversation, because the charter side is always going to want to stay
Yeah.
autonomous.
And-
I just know how to, I know how the charter side of
Right.
it. They're like, you know, this is the way we've been, this is the way we want to be. We want a lot of autonomy, you know, we have our own board, so to speak. It would be, how much authority do we have over the PCSB would be the major conversation there with the charters, is because right now we have no authority over there, really.
I mean, it'd be interesting again to look at what is the relationship.
And that's where you get
between
all the
charter
other
boards.
LEAs, is basically with them, because they have 60 something other LEAs.
Yeah.
That would be
And-
districts in other states.
And maybe in the end, we just say that just opens up too many things and we don't want to do it. But I mean, I think we should
Could be.
look at what is the relationship in other places between autonomous charters, because wherever you have charters, the point is they are autonomous, but who does anything with them?
Right.
You know, is it a council? Is it a state legislature? Is it a school board? Is it a state board? And what are the authorities they have?
Yeah.
You know? Sorry, didn't mean to.
No problem.
I mean to open up a big thing, but I think it's, you know, we got to sort of look at that as well, but.
So,
I'm pausing because I don't know if Alex, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think Ruth makes a valid point. But I also think it's important to note that, you know, although DC is this unicorn, the other the 50 states in this country, they don't all have the same system either, right? So just because there's a state board that might have more authority or more duties, that authority and duties still varies greatly across a variety of state boards, right? Like whether or not a state board is actually physically sitting under like a superintendent or a state chief school officer, like the equivalent of our superintendent, or if they actually oversee that department. So I mean, there's a lot of things that I think we might say, like, we can't be like other states, or we can't be like what other state boards do. But at the same time, one can make the argument that there are probably 25 to 30 different combinations of how educational governance is done in this country. I think one important point that Ruth did make was around like the local school board piece and the charter school board piece, because I do think, this is me just speaking what I think, but that due to the district's physical size, I do think that like the idea of like all these multiple boards in such a small area could be burdensome. That's personally, but I'm not the person that makes the decisions. But
yeah. It comes down to basically what will be our relationships with the LEAs. When you look at other states, the thing is that the superintendent is a cabinet member, and then everything else, regardless of what municipality we're talking about, kind of is underneath that person, so to speak, of all the education stuff. And that would be the difficulty here. As it currently stands, we're just over here on the side, so to speak, and we fall underneath what is the cabinet member, is the deputy mayor of education. Well, that would be flipped, so to speak, in a state type of operation where the lead person is that deputy mayor or whatever. Deputy mayor would go away, it would be the superintendent. And then everything else falls underneath that. So, and all the LEAs would funnel up to that particular position, and we would have to talk about where does that fall with charters, and like in states, their own little boards will be their own little boards, like KIP has a board and Friendship has a board, and, but they all have some responsibility to the State Board of Education. That would be the big difference. Just like right now, they have a certain amount of responsibility to the PCSB of how they govern themselves and what they do. All that would fall underneath. If that were to happen, if we were to model like most states, that's what would happen. Now, I don't see that happening, and I don't know what that conversation looks like, but that's basically what you're looking at, is that the state superintendent is the executive over all education for that particular state.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that actually.
For most places, so he's the chief executive.
Well, but
you look at Maryland and you look at Virginia.
But they are under the guidance of the State Board of Ed.
Yes.
So they're the chief executive, but I wouldn't say they run the board. I mean, it's a delegated system, right? I mean, it is true that the state superintendent, just to use Maryland, has some things that she does that kind of the board can't quite get at, but mainly the board oversees that person.
Yeah.
And you also have the governor out there doing whatever the governor does that can collide, and you have the state legislature. Anyway, I didn't mean to make it that complicated.
Not trying to make it all convoluted.
Yeah,
we need to find out what's best for us.
Yeah,
and that's the big thing. We need to find out what's best for us.
Right, and the way I think about it is to think about what are all the responsibilities in other states that are done by boards, and to sort of think which ones make sense for an elected board in DC to do.
For me, when I think about governance, Ebony Rose, it's accountability to the people that elect us. First and foremost, that's my biggest thing, is how can we be accountable to the people who elect us to these positions? Everything else, all the politics and stuff like that kind of falls, to some point, or peripheral type of things. but we do have a amount of people. It was the very first elected position that you had in the District of Columbia under home rule was the state board, well, the Board of Education at that time, and the authorities that they had. Before we had a council, all that stuff, we had a Board of Education. And so with that being said, there was reasoning for that. There's reasoning for it now. I do understand why they did mayoral control, and that a lot of those things have already been like outsourced. The reasoning behind why they said they did it, you know, we couldn't get buildings opened on time. We couldn't pass this, or all that stuff now, DGS does that. And that's not an argument anymore. For me, the argument is how is the State Board of Education responsible to the students and stuff like that, and the parents, you know, that give them that charge to look at education and make it a quality education. That's, to me, as I sit here, kind of like, and how do we get to a point where we provide that for the residents of the District of Columbia? Whatever that may be. I don't have an ideal. I don't come in this, like you have said numerous times, I don't have an end product where I say this is what I want. I'm trying to move everybody toward that direction. All I'm saying is I want to be accountable to people who elect me and who will come to me and ask me to solve problems like they come to you.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. Yes, like we have a lot going on in DC. We are unique. That is not untrue. I also do very much care about, Doc, to your point about the accountability question. I guess I think about it as like one of the things I would want to I guess unearth or uncover through this is like what are the pain points people are having now. I don't like when I think that's going to be important for engagement, because earlier in the conversation we talked about there are a lot of people who are not talking about governance as like the issue they want to tackle. I think most people get to a place of like, oh, was something wrong with the structure after they've tried to address an issue, whether it be,
Great.
you know,
I agree. It comes back to
enrollment or SPED service or whatever it is. And so I one of the things that's happening in my head is if where that fits in the conversation in regards to instead of being like a solution in search of a problem, like that we are we are creating a solution.
I agree.
In response to a problem.
Right.
And so
So one way to think about it, Ebony Rose, is, I mean, I like that idea to sort of start with, or one of the key opening questions is what are the pain points? And one is to sort of use that as a way to talk to, quote, regular people, right, who don't think about governance and what are the issues they're confronting and the problems they run into. And then the sort of the other half of that is to talk to the people who are kind of responsible or feel responsible for trying to solve the problems, and then what they have. So that's sort of a mix of its advocates, its principals, its LSAT, board council, PTO presidents. I mean, all those people who, when they're trying to solve problems, what are the problems that they're constantly being called on to solve and can't quite solve? Because they know, you know, they get more of the agglomeration of the problems and maybe have some ideas of what they're hitting, but from everybody else, you just get this broader picture of how they see it and feel it.
yeah. Okay. Okay. This is helpful. I mean, I think the things we're going to have to answer, and I don't know, and I'm going to be honest and saying, I don't know who's responsible for figuring this out. Is it me? And with the, in coordination with the staff, it's like this question about, or the staff and I guess maybe Zach and Emily, the best route to go for the parts we are going to need to outsource. Like, assuming we get approval to not use staff time for some of these things, which I think is important, both for capacity issues and for our own making sure you know, being as neutral as possible when it's appropriate. Who, and maybe Ruth, this question is to you as somebody who's been on the board. Who is responsible for figuring the best path forward out? Like, as far as the logistics of that. So like, is it that we should just include in our work plan and our prioritizations, like, here are a couple options for how we can go about this, whether that's the working through the universities or, you know, just bidding it out, or like what, how does that part work? Because I'm not familiar with the getting that done on the board, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the staff can jump in on this as well. What I would say is you have sort of the first shot at it. Either you individually or you drawing on us to say, this is what I think should happen. If you see that, which you can, to sort of say, okay, we've had the conversation, somebody else needs to figure this out. I think you can do that and seed that to staff. I think one of the issues right now is the staff is overloaded. So if we seed that to staff, it could push the whole thing off to a different priority level. Just think about that. But, and then insofar as whoever says, okay, I'm going to figure out what the plan is, here's what we want to do. Then you also have the question of who is lifting. If we want to work with the universities, are we asking staff to sort of figure out the logistics of that? Is that something we can take upon ourselves? If we, and I think insofar as we use a consultant, whatever the formal word is, that is my experience with that, is that it's technical in terms of how you do that in DC budget. So I think it is very much something we would really need the staff to do. Okay, staff, do you think I have that right, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think I'm not going to speak for all of the staff, but obviously John Paul noted that this summer we will be down one full-time staff member.
Why? Who's leaving and why?
Because a staff member will be welcoming the first baby. But no, yeah, so over the summer we'll be down one full-time staff member. However, we are obviously very blessed to have policy fellows that join us, and we actually are going to be bringing 2 policy fellows on over the summer. And so, I think the big question is, to Ruth's point, like identifying what are the major things that we'd like to do. I think it's been noted that like the lit review is, and then I think it's a discussion, and this is a John Paul question, as to whether or not it makes sense to do that internally and actually source it to a staff member or a policy fellow, or bring it out externally. But I think what Ruth is saying is accurate as far as process goes, but it's ultimately not my decision to be like, this is the work that's going to go to this person or not to this person. But yeah, is that helpful, not helpful?
Actually, can I just simplify, based on what Alex had offered this more simply? I think insofar as you have a preference, Ebony, you have the right to put that forward, and then people, the leadership, the admin committee, whatever, is going to have to juggle things, and you would see where it came out. But you have the right, insofar as you want it, along with the committee or your view of the committee, provided people don't rebel, to say this is what we think you think should happen. That's how I would say it. And then other things come into play. Does that make sense?
I think so. I mean, like, I think I assumed that I had the right to ask for stuff, but I probably also generally assume I have the right to ask for stuff. So there's that. I guess what I don't understand is like what is helpful to go with that request. Like, it doesn't make sense. I mean, and I took notes, but like, does it make sense for us, or is it useful for us as a committee to say, here are 3 ways that that could be realized as far as the lit review? Like with we can go to university route, we could go the bid and outright route. Here's our preference, and here's our timeline for like when we need that to be done. Like I get that. I guess I don't take for granted that between the staff and the leadership, they're juggling a lot of priorities. And how are you supposed? And I want to make sure I give people the information they need to make an informed decision, if that makes sense.
Right. No, it makes sense. It does.
Yeah.
So
Instead of
does.
just saying, I want these things and
Right.
I think they're important. That's not,
That makes perfect sense.
one way to think about it is if we as a committee or you could formulate, here's the 3 or 4 questions that we want answered. And perhaps by who, like we want these answered by a group of 20 residents, or we want this answered by a group of 10 experts, or this answered by a policy expert. But then write out the questions. Question 1 is we want to understand the specific ways in which families in DC find obstacles to bringing about the kind of improvements in their schools that they want to see. As an example, a similar kind of question to advocates. What are the kinds of obstacles that you face as what do you see as the greatest obstacles, and what are the greatest barriers to improving education, and what obstacles do you face addressing them? And I would also ask them, what are specifically the obstacles of mayoral control, and then have a list of questions for experts. And then you can start to figure out who can do those, who can organize the answering of them. But how do other states handle it? But anyway, my point is, if we can come up with 3, 5, 7 questions, this is what we need to have answered. That would help everybody sort of figure out, would frame the next question. Which is
I
how
see
we
your
get
mind
this done.
churning, Ebony Rose.
Or she's getting ready to get this. I'm not sure.
She's always good. Her mind is churning.
Yes, I'm processing. So my initial thought is like, I think guiding questions are helpful, like at a high level. I think because we are going to want to, I think guiding questions are helpful at a right level. Guiding questions are helpful, and that is the right level for where we are in this project, given that we want to make sure we outsource some of this work. Like, I want to make sure that, like, I think for the lit review, there might be a certain, we probably want to go a little bit more in depth on like the questions we would want answered. Yeah, I think for as far as any focus groups or engagement, I'm a little hesitant to go too deep into a list, because I want to make sure that they're not like leading, you know what I mean? That we lean on the people we need to do that work for us. Cause I guess I don't, the thing that's always kind of part of this project is we want to engage people. We want to capture as much information as possible. We're trying to be forward thinking. We are also trying to make it not about us in a way that is unhelpful. Like, yes, there are things that, yes, it's clear, like clearly it's about us. Like we're in it, we're in the conversation, but we want to do our best to make sure um, to guard against any like like self-serving or impropriety, like that we're leading the
That has been
conversation
my
in any
point from the
way.
beginning.
Yeah, like
Right.
that's a real thing, because wow, of course I trust us.
Mhm.
That's not good enough. That's not good enough. Like, well, I'm not saying, of course, like we don't, that's not what we want to do. And because it's not what we want to do, and we don't, and it's both we don't want to do it, we don't want to give the impression
Right.
that we're doing it.
That's the whole.
And so I do think guiding some guiding questions would be helpful for us as a committee right now. I also think that, especially with the lit review, we can probably go kind of a click deeper in anticipation that we want to hand that off to someone. And starting to think about questions for the expert. But I will hold off on formulating anything to, yeah, anything at that level for like the public engagement at this point. Because I think it's really important for us to, for that to be externally and neutrally facilitated.
I think part of, I mean, I'm just restating in a way what both of you had said, but just to sort of put a point on it, is the end result. I think what we're all saying, the end result of this is we would like to have knowledge, information, options for people to look at and consider and discuss.
Mhm.
And that's what we're driving towards. What's the knowledge that we want to have that people broadly don't now have, the information? And can we formulate it into options that are useful to people that they can choose among or alter, you know?
And Representative Thompson, acknowledging that you are the chair of this committee, I do have to leave. So, you're the only
Right.
person that can really adjourn and stuff like that, because I need to get to some work stuff that I got to get to. I got to get back to my office.
I totally understand. And we're supposed to be getting on the road. We were supposed to be gone, but we're going on college visits with my little sister.
Okay.
And so we were supposed to leave at 8 a.m. and you see where I am. So there's that. So can I restate what I think are our next steps, and we can adjourn after that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I think our next steps are that list of experts, like kind of firming that up a little bit. Which we can do via email, and hopefully starting to schedule for them to come to present to us as a committee. And then some corresponding questions for that, like a question bank for that. Starting to develop some guiding questions for the overall committee. Yeah, starting to develop some guiding questions, and the putting some meat around the bones of our requests, like our external requests, because that has some huge implications for our timeline and work.
Exactly.
So I think that's it. Am I missing anything?
The only thing you might want to add, but it might be too early, is to connect the guiding questions to possible products. In other words, we want to know X. What do
But do we know
Yeah.
what X is yet?
well, I don't know, but for example, it could say, what do families find their pain points? I'm just
Using that.
and then the
Phrase,
deliverable, so to speak, is we want a report that summarizes a focus group on this, or a report that summarizes responses to a survey, or something like that. Or on the literature review, it's, we're looking for a 20-page thing that will, well, I guess, and this is really the guiding questions, that will have the answers at least to X, Y, and Z.
So what I wrote down is, and maybe it's not this second, but in general, we need to think about how our guiding questions will connect to deliverables, right?
Good by me.
Huh?
That's good by me. Good for me.
Okay.
I mean, I approve.
That's what I heard you say. So I'm glad that's good by you. All right. So I did take some notes. I'll send a follow-up email just with like notes and like the things we need to act on. I'll take responsibility for taking a first stab at the what do you call? Requests? Because that's
Request.
something for Monday. So
Okay.
that I don't think we need to. I mean, I don't think we should be shifting our timeline is where we landed. That's what I took from our conversation because
Right.
Of where the world is. And so
I'm in
and then
agreement.
we can all kind of contribute to the list, but I'll put everything in one place for us.
And I know we're being staffed by Darren. Was there anything you guys think we missed in this as you guys have listened in?
No, there's not anything. I think those three kind of action next steps that Ebony Rose just outlined, I think are great. I also noted that in the chat, I'm going to send an email to all of you on some work that we did on state board governance in 2019. So it's been a while, but I think it would be helpful as we're starting to wrap our heads around some of those questions Ebony Rose. But like, what do other places look like? What are those, by looking at other states, like it might generate some questions and ideas about thinking about the structure that might be best for the district.
That would be helpful.
And actually, I had an intern who did a review of some stuff, which I will also send out.
Okay.
All right,
I would only add, if you are in contact with people like professors who just know this entire world, maybe also ask them like another source of information. I know at GW, we have like Josh Glazer, who just looks at the history of education and might know the history of DC education, but there might be folks that could also point in the right direction. But we, like Alex said, we do have some resources on hand.
And I will note that Darren's mention of Josh Glazer is my advisor and is the person who teaches the class that is about governance and
Full circle.
accountability. So, it all works out in
Full
the end.
circle.
All right.
All right, y'all. I have to go.
Bye,
So
guys.
I'll be logging off.
Have a great
Thank
weekend.
you.
And since I'm here on his computer, I'm logging
Yeah.
off too.
Are we adjourned, Representative Chair?
I believe we are. I always said that was a non-debatable motion, but I believe we're adjourned. We seem to vote on it every time, but okay.
All right, see you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.